All right. So what's up, everybody? I'm Benny Hurwitz, Portfolio Ambassador for Wild Turkey Distilling Co. Campari America and Wild Turkey are really excited to partner with Portland Cocktail Week for distance learning. We're also really excited for our guest today, Josh Seaburg. Josh hails from Norfolk, Virginia, and has been in the industry for almost a decade. So Josh, I'm going to let you do a little bit of the talking and tell us what you're all about, your story, how you got into the industry.
For sure. Yeah. So I run bars and bar programs here in Norfolk, Virginia. I do a little bit of consulting for like front of house optimization and bar design, things like that. And I'm a big old giant nerd. So I spend a lot of my time sitting around thinking about things like milk washing and fat washing and, what to do with a centrifuge and how to make fast service but prep heavy cocktails in a way that is fun and interesting.
Awesome. So you kind of mentioned it already, but today's seminar topic, of course, as we know, milk punch and fat washing. And we're going to be using a little bit of Wild Turkey 101 in the demo today. Thank you, Josh. So I thought it'd be fitting to maybe dive into a little bit of the history and remind people about this product before we get started. So Wild Turkey 101 is what we're using. It is the original Wild Turkey product. So we'll start with the history. The brand starts in 1940, but where we make the whiskey down in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, goes much deeper than that, actually. So started with a family called the Rippies that came over from Ireland, two brothers. Down the line, their sons were the ones that actually built up the distilling industry, not just for that part of town, but they represented Kentucky entirely. By 1893, their bourbon was featured at the World's Fair exhibition in Chicago. So it was a pretty big honor to be chosen out of 400 different bourbons at the time. Unfortunately, they did shutter for Prohibition, but the Rippies came back after, started another distillery in that same location, brought back their master distiller from before, a guy named Bill Hughes. And that's who taught Jimmy Russell. So I think a lot of people watching are going to know who Jimmy Russell is, but just in case you don't, Jimmy Russell is our legendary master distiller at Wild Turkey. He started there in 1954, so a couple decades after Prohibition ended. Jimmy's still there, been there ever since. He'll be celebrating 66 years at Wild Turkey this September. He's got a son named Eddie who started there in 1981. And these two guys have been making all the Wild Turkey that you've probably ever had in your life. So Jimmy learned from Bill Hughes, and it's a recipe that's just pretty much been continued since then. And that classic recipe goes into all of our bourbons. And then we have a rye mash bill that goes into all of our ryes. So whether it's Wild Turkey 101, Rare Breed, or even our Russell's Reserve bourbons, it all starts the same. So we use 100% non-GMO grains, which is really important to us. We've got a traditional mash bill with a nice spicy rye content. We have a proprietary yeast strain, also very important. We know we've been using the same yeast since at least 1954 when Jimmy started. So it's something that we think is very important and plays a big role in the end flavor profile. So that said, when that stuff comes off the still and goes into the barrel, they all get stamped Wild Turkey. They're all the same. We don't know what they're going to be, but Wild Turkey 101 being the original product, that's what we want to focus on today a little bit, I think. But with that said, Josh, I'm going to pass it off to you. And if anyone has any questions, go ahead and type them in the comments. And Josh, you'd like me to feed them to you as we go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone was at Milk Baby, my original milk washing class at Portland Cocktail Week back when traveling was a thing, you all know that I live for the interruptions.
Awesome.
But yeah, so let's get into it. So today talking about milk and fat washing, which are sort of two sides of this same coin, which is using alcohol's ability to absorb lipids and then either build or break the infusion that you're making to add or subtract flavor and body. So when you're selecting spirits for this was like an exciting thing to do with Wild Turkey anyway, because what we're counting on in general is alcohol's ability to take these fats and flavors out of whatever it is that you're washing with, be it like fats, oils, or pulling the fat and the whey proteins out of milk. So Wild Turkey 101 is an awesome thing to go for this, because you've got that extra proof, and it's got like a nice full flavor. So even when you're doing some of these more intense washes that we'll get into like kind of towards the end, the flavor of the whiskey will still shine through and you're not just completely muting it. So the first topic that I want to talk about is fat washing. I've got here a little bit of brown butter infused wild turkey. We'll get to the method on that in a second. But essentially with fat washing, the goal is to add body and flavor by adding fat to your spirit, letting the alcohol absorb the flavors and the lipids, which gives it flavor, of course, and then body, and then removing all of the particulate matter so that what you wind up with is still like a clear product, because nobody wants chunky whiskey. You can do this with pretty much any fat. Butter is a really popular one because it's a little more shelf stable than some of your more famous fat washes, like the bacon fat old fashioned that PDT did back in the day, and things like that. So technique wise, it is important to recognize that in fat washing, you're adding food product to the spirit that you're infusing. And so you're changing the stability of it. So just upfront, I like to tell everyone that when you're getting into this, remember that you're taking two usually shelf-stable products, the fat that you're using and then whatever spirit it is. And because you're changing the chemistry of that by introducing new things, you're then making it less stable than it originally was. So it's important to use those products within like 2 weeks. I like to keep all of that refrigerated, and just be mindful of that. And then the fact that if you're using something like butter, using something like milk, those allergen components are all still there. So it's always nice to fully label that so we don't poison our guests. As our friend Phoebe likes to say, not killing your guests is really easy if you just pay attention. So for general fat washing, I like to take about 20% by volume of the fat that I'm putting in for like whatever we're working with. So in this case, we took about like half a stick of butter. So I guess it's 4 ounces. And then just browned it up really nicely and then let it cool. So when you're doing anything like obviously hot liquid, you're browning butter in a pan. You want to let it cool before you add volatile alcohol to that so that you don't blow yourself up in your own kitchen. So you do that, you let that steep and then cool to a little above room temperature is fine, giving your whiskey the amount of time it needs to absorb those things. And then just refrigerate it. So you can see, like in this, it's been out of the freezer just for a little bit, but the butter will form a puck on top of it. And then it's really easy to filter out, which I'm going to do here now. In any kind of like infusion work or anything like this, I really, really like to just use cold brew coffee bags. You can have them for like not a lot of money. It saves you from spending like a ton of money on like sort of the brand name super bag, and they work just as well.
Josh, quick question. The brown butter, just in case anybody's not familiar with that technique from cooking, what can you talk a little bit more in depth how you would brown the butter to infuse?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's really just like putting butter in a pan. I was using an induction heater, so I had it at like 250 degrees, and then letting that butter rock until it starts to brown. So like you stir it pretty frequently and you'll see the butter solids start to come out and turn this really nice like caramelized golden brown color. That you can wash with like untoasted butter, but I don't find it to be very good with how easy it is to just like get that nice, those brown notes. It's like a little sweeter, you get that Maillard reaction, and it's like a much fuller flavor by doing that.
Cool.
So then you can see here, there's a little bit of cloudiness, a little bit of dissolved matter, but like overall, that's a pretty solid wash. We'll use that for another purpose here in a little bit. And then what's also exciting is the fat that you're left over with. So this is now essentially whiskey infused butter, which, you know, is fun for all manner of things. One of my favorite fat wash experiments from back in the day, just proves you can do it with anything, is we did a foie gras washed 21-year-old scotch. Honestly, just to kind of see if we could and to be a little obnoxious, but the scotch infused foie fat that we pulled off of that was like one of the most interesting things to cook with that I think I've ever had. Scotch foie steak was mind-blowing.
Wow.
But yeah, so with fat washing, it's important to remember, like I said, that you are adding food product, but you can add a lot of body and flavor there. And you can do this with oil as well. So I know, Benny, like we talked about coconut washing or coconut oil washing rum, for example. And that's a good way to add a lot of body without flavor. So you're not pulling very much flavor out of any kind of neutral oils or anything, but it does help sort of bolster the spirit that you're working with and sort of like fill that out a little more so you can add body without adding sugar in a cocktail, for example.
Cool.
Fat washing, make sense?
Makes sense.
Cool. So we're pretty light on that just because it is such a straightforward process. Again, like 20% by volume of whatever your rendered fat is, let it infuse, freeze it, skim off the solids, and you know, then you're profiting. What I'm really excited to talk about and sort of the bigger crux of this is milk washing and milk punch. So my focus has always been more on using milk washing to break ingredients rather than to stabilize, which is what it's used for in milk punch. But both processes kind of work the same way. Whole milk is in and of itself suspension of different fats and proteins. And by like selectively breaking those, you can use them to achieve a whole bunch of different results. So in general, the science of milk washing has to do with breaking that suspension and getting specifically the casein proteins to fall out of solution. And then casein has this really interesting ability to mop up and bind with other solids, and then especially like tannic and phenolic compounds. So tannin and phenols are the things that, for example, make like oversteeped tea so astringent, like kind of unpleasant, but they can also be good in balance. So with whiskey, obviously, in barrel aging, a part of the reason that you're doing that is to pull some of those oak tannins out and fill out the flavor. But Benny, Wild Turkey doesn't make any badly made whiskey, but I'm sure you and I have both tasted like something overaged where like that oak was like way too harsh, way too astringent. And that's just like any other infusion that exists where you can over extract, and milk washing can be a way to fix that. So one of my favorite examples in milk washing is tea, right? So in order to get a lot of tea flavor, you need to oversteep the tea into whatever medium you're using. That makes it tannic, that makes it astringent. So by milk washing, you're able to remove that. In general, with milk washing, you just add 25%, so a little more than fat washing, by volume of whole milk. It's got to be whole milk. That's the best sort of like fat to protein to volume ratio, like for this application, which is convenient because I don't think I've ever worked in a bar or restaurant that didn't keep whole milk around. And then add your product to the milk, not the other way around. And then this way you get a little more even of a break. So to exemplify that, I'll walk through like this milk punch that we put together and then talk a bit more about that as it drips out. So what I've got in this container is a pretty like basic cocktail build. What's in here right now is 1/2 ounce of coconut fat washed Appleton. We've got 3/4 ounce of lemon and 1 ounce of like a lower sugar pineapple syrup. I should specify this is 2 cocktails worth, so I'll double those measurements. And then I'm going to add 1.5 ounces per cocktail, so 3 ounces all day of this brown butter wash 101.
Awesome. So you're starting the milk punch now. We did have a question. How long is the shelf life on a milk punch?
So we'll kind of get to that with milk punch in particular, because of the way like the pH balances out and the fact that you're removing all the solids. Milk punch is stable pretty indefinitely. In the research I've done on it, they've like found bottles of milk punch back from like the 1840s that were just cellared. And it'll kind of age and change. A lot of people actually like to let their milk punch kick around for about a week for those flavors to kind of like meld and mellow out. With milk washed ingredients, because you don't have as much going on there chemically, so you don't have like the residual acid from citrus or whatever, those shelf lives are like still quite really long. But eventually the whey proteins that are bound in suspension, because they don't come out, they don't break quite as easily, will start to come out of solution and flocculate out. It's still like safe to drink. You can have that forever, but you have to like rerun it, like restrain it, and then you're gonna lose a little bit of body over time. But I haven't had that problem of like whey flocculation or any kind of like degradation with milk punch. It's pretty stable.
Cool. There's another question as well to jump back to fat washing. Have you ever used organic olive oil, or do you know if that is an option?
Olive oil is super awesome for fat washing. I consulted for a Mediterranean restaurant, and like one of our most popular cocktails was like a sort of like faux dirty martini, where we did an olive oil washed vodka, and you get a little bit of aroma when you're dealing with something like as neutral as vodka. But what was really great about it was, yeah, it adds like huge body and a little bit of color. So yeah, any oils, like if it's food safe and fat heavy, you can use it. Cool. I would probably like heat the oil a little bit, like not anywhere close to smoking, but just to get it like above room temperature, probably like 130 degrees or so. So it's a little more accessible, like to be infused. But other than that, yeah, it's a similar process. You just kind of like agitate it, let it sit for a while, freeze it, and then you'll have like a puck of olive oil that's then flavored with whatever you use to infuse it into.
All right, there's another, this next question's like a little more out there. I don't know if you'll know, but if you use cannabis butter for fat washing, will the THC go into the booze?
Well, one, I really, really highly recommend against like mixing psychoactive ingredients. That's like a pretty like hot topic of debate in some of like the more like experimental Facebook groups I'm parts of and things like that. So if you're doing it for home experimentation, that's the only way I recommend it. Do not serve your guests like can of butter cocktails in your bar. That said, THC is definitely soluble in alcohol. And if it's in an infused butter, then it's already like has been heated and has been activated. Probably, like I'm pretty sure. I can't think of any reason why it wouldn't, is like probably the more clear thing. But, you know, definitely like don't recommend combining substances in that way, because it's really hard to like monitor potency in that way. And I don't know how flavorful like your butter is, but I don't find like just the flavor of marijuana to be super great. I don't know, maybe chartreuse might be nice. But yeah, so scientifically, I think that should work. But from a more practical stance, neither I nor Benny endorse it.
All right, you want to keep going with that milk punch, and then we'll jump back into some questions in a minute?
Yeah, definitely. So
Awesome.
to take it back just a little bit, we have here this punch base: pineapple syrup, lemon, oil washed rum, and brown butter washed bourbon. When you're doing milk punches, I prefer to do like 2 cocktails at a time, just because it's a little easier to work with that amount of volume. And so then I've got in this jar here just 2 ounces of like room temp whole milk. So like I discussed, you pour whatever your beverage of choice is into the milk, not the other way around. If you pour the milk in first, we'll see like this curdling reaction in a second, but it'll curdle instantly. And that gives you a less efficient wash, and you might wind up with cloudy punch.
Yeah, I've only ever done milk punch at one place where I worked. But pouring in the cocktail, I remember batching the full punch, and then the last step is you pour the cocktail into the punch, or the cocktail into the milk. That was always the most fun part. Can you slide that a little bit into the middle of your screen for me?
Yeah. I'm just going to give it a quick stir first.
Gotcha.
And then give the up close. So you can see with this, there we go. It broke pretty much immediately. That's because of the amount of acid that's like in any punch, any like kind of properly balanced cocktail. You're going to have like a high enough acid level to curdle that milk. If you're working with like just a straight infusion, so like let's say, I don't know, you want to milk wash some kind of like herbal or aromatic spirit to like break it for fun, or you have an infusion that like is maybe a little too phenolic but not like hyper intense, you might need to add either a little bit of lemon juice, or I just keep around a citric acid solution. Citric acid is super cheap and easy to get, and is useful for a lot of things. So once you've got this broken, you want to give it like some light, gentle stirring, but the goal is not to agitate the curds too much, or you risk sort of reincorporating it into solution and then making it a little more difficult to deal with.
Yeah. So a couple other oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to put like a little point on that, this you can let sit for quite a long time. I know people who, when they do their punches, they let it sit for like 24 hours. I don't think that's quite necessary. The one that I did that I'll show you all in a second, I only let sit for about 20 minutes, and it came out perfectly clear. But cool. So we're gonna let this sit and then talk some more questions.
Yeah, so while we're talking about the punch, you mentioned room temperature milk. Somebody did ask, is the temperature of the milk important? Room temp or heated, or straight out, straight out of the fridge okay?
Yeah, straight out of the fridge is fine. Room temp or colder is really ideal. America's Test Kitchen did like a huge rundown of like milk punch science. And one of the things that they found over like repeating this recipe over, I think they did like well over 50 different samples, was that when you heat the milk, you are kind of like taking a crapshoot where there's like a chance that it'll help the process happen a little more quickly, but there's also a chance that it's still going to leave your stuff cloudy and like it's just not going to work very well. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm sure that has to do with sort of like the unpredictability of like protein breakdown under heat. So yeah, like cold milk, or like I only mentioned that it was room temperature just because it's like been sitting for a little bit, which is fine because like as we saw, it's still broke and did the thing we need it to do. But so as long as you can like have it chemically unaltered, you know, so like not heated is your best bet.
Don't heat it, room temp or colder. I remember we used to just take it straight out of the fridge. So
yeah, for sure.
And it always worked really well. Couple questions regarding non-dairy milks, soy milk, or just any. Do any alternatives work for milk washing?
Yeah, this was a popular question like in Portland too. Then I did some research on it after. Yes, asterisk. So you can use coconut milk, for example, manages to like kind of get the same effects. Like you'll still wind up with a clearer milk punch. I've had less luck using coconut milk to use like in like more specific like milk washing applications,
Mm-hmm.
but you can definitely break coconut milk to make a milk punch. I haven't experimented with soy. And then the other thing which makes it like a little less useful, especially if you're using those alternative milks for like dietary restriction or like ethical reasons, is they all work better if you do add like a little bit of whole milk. It encourages like the whole thing to come out of solution more easily. But yeah, so you can definitely do it. I need to play with like oat and nut milks. Oat milk will work for a milk punch. Nut milks, I'm not sure. But whenever you're selecting something for it, the idea would definitely be to try to get something that's like super minimally processed, doesn't have a bunch of like additives and stabilizers, because those are working against the goal, which is to destabilize and break whatever it is you're working with.
Cool. What's a good ratio for milk to cocktail or milk to acid in your punch?
Milk to cocktail, 25%. So this was 2 cocktails, 8 ounces of booze. You make the punch before you dilute it to like keep all those things there. And so then we use 2 ounces of milk. I find that to be like pretty bulletproof. So if you're, infusing 500 mils of like, I don't know, like whiskey with black tea, you're going to want to use 125 mils of milk. And the scalability there works at least up to, making a 7-gallon batch of like oversteeped milk washed black tea in a small hotel room, which I've done, and was not the most fun thing I've ever done in my whole life. But yeah, it's 20% or 25% rather, magic number. 20% fats, 25% for milk.
Gotcha.
In terms of acid, like just a balanced cocktail. So like anything that's in that ratio of like the vague sour family where you're like dealing with like 2 1/3 or 2 3/4 3/4. It really doesn't take a lot of acid to break milk. So it's more, you're then able to like focus more on like the flavor and profile of the cocktail that you're shooting for, rather than having to like stress about making sure that you have enough acid in there.
Gotcha. And then somebody else asked if you can add lactase enzyme to the milk before you make the milk punch. Would that do anything?
Adding lactase enzyme to like cow's milk or to
I'm sorry,
like
to dairy milk before washing is what the question actually says. Before washing. I'm not really familiar with it.
Yeah, so lactase enzyme is like what lactose intolerant people take to like help them break down, because like lactose is a complex sugar. So lactose definitely still present in anything milk washed. A lactase enzyme, let me do like a very fast Google actually, and then I might be able to give, I'm just looking at like how lactase enzyme workability uses.
And then there is another question that's just asking, are milk punches okay for lactose intolerant people? If so,
no,
they are not okay. Okay.
They are not, because like I said, lactose is a complex sugar. So you're breaking out protein. And I actually have a panel that was going to get together pre-COVID to test this kind of like on a scale of people who have mild reactions to different like aspects of dairy, like one who for sure is allergic to casein, one who for sure is allergic to whey, and like one who is lactose intolerant. And we were going to taste through some different like processes of milk wash and like measure their levels of discomfort, so I could answer that like a little more accurately. But there's like no reason to believe that lactose would come out in that solution, just because it's like neither a solid particulate matter nor protein. The casein and the solids and phenols are really the only things that are coming out in that case.
Yeah. So there was a second part to that was asking if lactose-free milk would work, but you kind of answered that, right? Probably not.
Well, it might, because I think lactose-free milk is just something that's been treated to remove the lactose sugar. So like as long as there's still casein in it, it should work. And then also like having just looked at the lactase enzyme question, it says like the optimal active temperature for that lactose enzyme is like body temperature, so like 98 or so degrees. So I would think that if you added the lactose enzyme and then let that rock at that temperature for a while, which you could do just by like, you get to 98 degrees just by kind of like keeping it around in oven or like on top of a commercial refrigerator or whatever, that would probably let it act enough. I don't know. I'm not personally lactose intolerant, so I have no like easy way to measure like lactose symptoms or discomfort, but try it in small doses and then like let me know.
Cool. Yeah, I would say probably just take the lactase as intended, like you normally would if you were going to eat dairy,
Yeah,
instead of
that
trying to like
is the
put it in the
smarter
drink. But I am not lactose intolerant. So cool. Thank you. And then, I mean, questions are rolling in now. There's a couple that jump back to fat washing.
Cool.
How many times would you reuse the byproduct, the fat that you've used to wash the spirit?
Probably like just the once. Like, so you can use it for secondary use, but it's kind of the same with any infusion. Like if you're infusing properly and if your technique is correct, you're getting everything out of it that you can like in the first jump. You could, if you were like trying to be real stingy with something like if you were going to do something like foie gras or something that's like obviously super expensive, you could probably like supplement. So you could like add some into the next batch, but for the most part, it's like once you've used it, it's changed. You can put it onto like secondary uses, but you'll have a hard time using it for like the primary purpose again.
So it's like a bourbon barrel. Just use it once.
Yeah.
Get the most
Yeah,
out of
exactly.
it. Pass it on to something else.
Right. Brown butter wash your bourbon and then sell your bourbon washed butter to somebody who wants to make like brown butter beer.
Right on. Awesome. So let's see. There are a few more questions, but did you want to demo anything else or show us where we're at with that milk punch before we keep going?
Yeah, so we're at a good place with the milk punch, especially for showing like that kind of like quick technique, which I prefer because I'm just very impatient and hate waiting for anything ever. So now that we've got that, you can see like that really nice bit of separation between like the actual curds and the rest of it. So I'm going to demo how to strain that. And then while that's dripping, we can get back to some questions.
Cool.
So you want a fine filter. And what we're going for here, and this is the case with, things all over the place. This is the case with like milk washing and with making milk punch. The idea is now to set it up in a situation where all of this liquid is going to run through like a mat of that casein protein as sort of a final barrier to like rip everything out. So I'm going to do this in just like a little pour over setup that we have here. And then that will work fine. I proved that earlier, which is nice. So this is just a metal filter. You can use like paper coffee filters. You can use like the super bags, like those cold brew bags like I was talking about. Anything that has like a large enough surface area that you're going to be able to get that mat of casein there for your product to run through is like going to do you well. So
gotcha.
you just
so it also kind of depends on how much you've made. You might need a bigger vessel naturally.
Yeah, for sure.
If you're making a large batch of punch, you're probably going to need a big super bag or something.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, again, like it's not necessary to like pay the prices that you'll get for like brand name super bags or whatever. Anything that's like food safe and up to like the level of microns will work just fine. All right, so you can see this is dripping through and there's still like a little bit of cloudiness there. That's okay because the whole purpose of this first run is to get that bed of casein established in the filter medium that we're using. And then we pour it through very slowly again. And that's when we get the actual final product. So I started one earlier, also because sometimes milk wash is unpredictable and I would hate for like something, to have gone wrong. But so this is like the exact same recipe on the second patch.
Wow. So let me just double check something. You said when you pour it through for the second pass, you're not changing the filter. You're pouring it through. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you want that casein to continue to do its work on the punch.
Yep, exactly. And I'll actually show you the, so that is like what the filter looks like at the end of it. So you can see like a little stuck to the top, but in general, what we were going for is like this down here, this just like cone of like milk solids and coagulate. And that's what's making it actually clear. Like you can run this through a coffee filter, you know, 100 times and it'll get like kind of clear, but you're also going to lose like a ton of product. This is like the more efficient way to do it. And I guess is why they've been doing it for like 200 years.
Right on. Well, let's hit a few more questions.
Awesome.
Just someone asking maybe if you have a preference, salted or unsalted butter for your brown butter, Wild Turkey 101.
Yeah, unsalted butter for sure. Salt in cocktails is awesome, but it's one of those things that like, it's just like cooking, right? You can always add salt, you can never take it away. So if you wanted that, I would just like supplement your brown butter turkey with like a little bit of saline solution at the end rather than, you know, risking like ruining the batch of whatever you're doing.
Gotcha. All right.
Also,
Now
I read in some like, I don't know, some Reddit thing about like behind the scenes of industries too, that unsalted butter is generally like the higher quality butter that comes from that manufacturer. I don't know like if that has like too much legs behind it, but you know, it might also be a consideration.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, someone's asking about combining these techniques, which you are in fact doing today. So when stacking techniques, is there any more or less instability? So shelf life, I guess, or anything like that, or would it not clarify as well? Or?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it definitely clarifies well because like we've seen that with the brown butter thing, because specifically when you're like stacking into the process of milk punch, a proper clear milk punch is clear because it has no solids in there. Solids are usually like what causes spoilage. It's either like solids there that like start to degrade and that ruins your product, or it's affected by oxidization. And since milk punch isn't like super susceptible to like oxidative ruining, milk punching your milk in whatever method you choose will make your end product like significantly more stable. If you're using methods like this, like I'll probably still refrigerate this batch like with the brown butter wash just to kind of like hedge my bets a bit.
Gotcha. So I've heard of this in other types of cocktails like Ramos gin fizz variations, but what are your thoughts on cereal milk being used to then clarify your milk punch?
So that's like technique stacking, right? Because now you've got like an infusion on an emulsion. I don't know to what degree that would affect the flavor of it, right? Because if you're taking cereal and then you're infusing it into the milk, like where that actual flavor is coming from is more to do with like dissolved cereal solids in the milk than it is any kind of like changing of like what the milk is, right? Like you're essentially just making like a suspension of like very tiny bits of cereal in the milk, and that's why it tastes like it. So then when you filter it, all of that would come out. So you may be able to get like a little bit of like residual like, you know, fruitiness or like chocolateness or whatever. But I think the better bet, I don't know. That's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Well, we can keep. I mean, it's obviously it's going to add like some sugar and stuff, depending on the cereal, but usually, most likely, I would imagine it may still work though. So let's keep it moving. We got a few more questions coming in regarding all this great stuff. So when you're picking flavors or flavor profiles to try to create, like what has been your favorite experiment, and how do you pick them, or how do you come up with them? What's your mindset, I guess?
I always start with using like, where would milk go, right? So I've done like milk washed strawberry infusions, which come out like awesome and like super light and delicate. My favorite though is the long process, pain in the ass creme de cacao that I make. So the way that works, and this is something that like we talked about during the Portland seminar also, is cacao like on its own, like just unprocessed cacao nibs, taste like baking chocolate, like they're not sweet at all, and they're also very astringent, like almost to the point of sour. So like definitely my favorite use of milk washing, the one that I use like most often day to day, is making this creme de cacao, wherein you infuse cacao nibs into your spirit. And whenever I'm doing like infusions of something that doesn't want to happen very easily, like I said, I hate waiting. I'm very impatient, so I'll always do it in an immersion circulator. And I find like 65 Celsius to be sort of like the magic number to get an infusion that would take a couple weeks done in about 3 hours, 4 hours. So then after you do that, you infuse, like I just use 100 proof vodka, you infuse cacao nibs into that, and then you have something that tastes like this bitter astringent chocolate. By milk washing that, you keep a lot of the flavor, and then you add the body that you think of, like sort of when you think chocolate, and then it also removes all of that excess astringency, and then you just kind of like sweeten it to taste on the back end with like rich simple, and it's freaking delicious. I've got that recipe somewhere. I'll dig it up, and you know, if like going forward, if anybody has any like further questions or wants to share experiments, especially lactose enzyme person, like by all means hit me up. I live to talk about this.
Awesome. So next up, when you make a milk punch, you've removed the solids. It looks really clear. In fact, that one that you just whipped up last night. Do you have any experience with carbonating the milk punches once they've been clarified?
So carbonating would be tricky because the whey proteins are still going to be left in solution. That's like what's left there to sort of like flock out later. And what whey does really, really well is foam. So carbonating milk punch offhand like kind of sounds like a nightmare to me, because when you're adding that carbonation, I think those proteins are just gonna like cause it to like foam up like a mother. It's worth trying. I feel like I've heard of somebody like carbonating milk punch before. Does that ring a bell to you, Benny?
It does, but I don't know where that was or who that was actually.
Yeah,
but I feel it would be milk punch. It does, because like the whole thing you're getting or even going for besides clarity is like the texture and the body, the thickness. And I feel like that might not work so well with carbonation. It's almost like going for two different mouthfeels.
Yeah. All right. So what I'm doing here, I guess I'll move this into shot.
Yep.
So we've got like a pretty good amount of this like first run milk punch, and there's still a bit left in the filter, and that's okay. I can't like really show it because I'll tilt and pour a bunch of stuff all over the counter. But so now I'm just gonna like very gently pour the milk punch back over this run and just kind of refill it. The idea is to pour it slowly so you don't disturb all the sediment that's on the bottom, because again, like that's what's doing the work for you here.
So that sediment is essentially like a second filter.
Yeah, exactly. And a much finer filter, both because it's like packed pretty densely in there, and also it's gonna like preferentially bind with all of the things that we're trying to remove from the milk punch.
Awesome. So we had someone ask about carbonating milk punch. Now we have frozen milk punch, blended or frozen drink machine. Any experience or any thoughts on that?
I don't know why one would do so. That should work. You'd have to dilute it, obviously, because I think like the magic number for frozen drink machines, I know it's like 14% sugar,
Mhm.
and then something like 26 or 28% ABV, maybe lower. I would have to think about that some more, but it would need to be diluted. Like you wouldn't be able to just freeze what's coming out of here in a pleasant manner. But when you're going for like clarity and then like you said body, putting that in a frozen drink machine sounds like just a really laborious way to make a frozen drink, because I can't see it having like too much impact on the final product. And that would be expensive to do.
Yeah, it's almost like you'd go through all the trouble to clarify it and then lose, like you said, lose those two elements that you're going for, because
Right.
it would probably just be like a frosted color drink, and then it's going to be so cold and frozen, you're not really going to get that milky texture. I don't think so.
No. And then I'm not
I don't
even
know.
sure, because like cold wants to kind of like condense suspension, so like I guess that like in terms of like safety and stability, that would be pretty legit. But yeah, like from a practical standpoint, I don't know. But also, you know, I do like plenty of non-practical stuff. So probably like you could freeze it. I just don't, like I said, I don't know that there would be too much like tangible difference. And because the flavor of milk punches are generally like so much softer and delicate than like the sum of their parts before you do that process, I could see like a frozen milk punch just kind of like tasting like cold.
Yeah, because it's like usually kind of delicate or spirit forward flavor, right?
Yeah, generally.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point, is to like tame all of these things. Because then also like another point I wanted to touch on is like milk punch service. So like you've gone through all this work, you have like now this like beautiful, clear, well-balanced product. And most of the milk punch serves I see on the regular are just like pour over ice and you're ready to go. And because you're doing all of this like stripping of flavor and this sort of like inherent balancing act, what that also does is sort of like reduce the harshness, and it removes the need for aeration, because like the density is all at equilibrium, right? So like we shake cocktails because it's ingredients with different like specific gravities and densities, and we need those like incorporated and basically emulsified. Since this is already done with that, you know, this is like one of those rare citrus cocktails that don't need to be shaken.
Cool. Awesome. So we talked about some fat washing. We made some brown butter infused 101 bourbon. You did a coconut fat wash Appleton rum. And like you mentioned, that's just more so going for the body, the mouthfeel, rather than the flavor. Like you probably will get a little bit of coconut flavor like you do when you cook with coconut oil, but it's really subtle. And then you brought those together in this punch with pineapple syrup, lemon. What else was in there?
It's pineapple syrup, lemon, the brown butter wine. Oh, that's it. Two modified spirits, and sour and sweet. One thing that I think would be fun to touch on before I guess we tackle these like last couple of questions is you and I talked about an experiment like with the interest of breaking things, right? And we talked about breaking Braulio with milk washing. Not every application works for everything. So I tried to last night I milk washed some Braulio, and it is definitely astringent enough to break milk on its own. I didn't need to add any citric acid or anything. But when it like came out of the centrifuge, it was bad. So some things are just better the way the makers intended it, and you know, when you break it, you actually break it.
Yeah. You broke it.
I
can't imagine what did it taste like then, because usually it's like foresty, herbaceous, bright.
So
bitter.
all of that aroma was like removed in the milk washing process. And it made my kitchen smell like it very, very much. Like my kitchen just smells like gentian and like alpine shrubbery. And so then what was left was like clear, but somehow both like not very flavorful and also like really overwhelmingly bitter.
Yeah, we did get another question.
Sure.
We kind of talked about coconut milk. What about sweetened condensed coconut milk for either or both washing or a milk punch?
Sweetened condensed coconut milk. I mean, the sweetening aspect is like not a big deal, but you would probably like want to uncondense it because the volume is like just as important as sort of like the concentrations of things that go in there. That's why like either using whole milk or trying to replicate the balance of whole milk, like in terms of fat and protein with like alternative milks is very important. And I believe like any of those like canned milks and stuff like are pretty like heavily jacked with stabilizers. And that would seem like a pretty significant roadblock to me.
Yeah, I mean, because I've used sweetened condensed milk, even like dairy milk, shaken it in a drink with acid, and it doesn't curdle. So,
Right.
Yeah, you might be right. When it's all sugared up and cooked down like that, it probably doesn't have all the proteins and things it needs still to break.
Yeah. Right, because the whole point is to have like the closest thing to like chemically unaltered milk, because like in doing this process, we're chemically altering it. So, you know, it's like trying to, I don't know, I was looking for an analogy, wasn't coming to me. But you,
Yeah.
you don't want something that's like already been tampered with before you tamper with it.
Cool. And then you already kind of mentioned this as well, but let's jump back as far as like using acid in the milk punch. Obviously, it's important. You said pretty much standard sour ratios is what works well. Could you maybe put a percentage on that, like a percentage of acid you think in the punch, like a minimum requirement to get it to break?
Yes, but let me do like a quick calculation thing. So lime juice is like 24, 28% citric acid. And I know it'll break with 3/4 of an ounce. So if we're talking, that's like 0.0. Yeah, so if it's like 8%, yeah, 8% citric acid, I think. As long as like you're hitting in that ballpark. Maybe you could probably even go as low as like 5 or 6, because even when you're dealing with like a milk wash suspension, especially, it really does not take much.
Yeah.
You just want to like bump the pH enough that that like the casing becomes unhappy and wants to leave. And so in a 10%, yeah, I would even call it like a pretty like inconsequential percent.
Yeah, I mean, if you just base it off 8 or 10%, I did the math. A 3-ounce cocktail, like single serving, it's about a 1/4 ounce of citrus. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
3%, or I'm sorry, 8% of 3 is 0.24. So
right,
about a 1/4 ounce. So just like same way I think, I guess, when I'm making a frozen drink and I'm scaling up, you know, I'm starting any cocktail with just like a single serving portion. So if you think of it in that regard, in your milk punches, use at least a 1/4 ounce to 3/4 ounce of citrus.
Yeah, and then like to double down on the point about balance is because it takes so little acid, the focus should really be on like the balance of flavor of this cocktail. And especially with attention paid towards those sort of like secondary flavor notes and the things that are going to like really be given a platform to shine after you run it through and like take out all the solids. And that like focusing on the balance in that way is like a little bit more important than worrying about the acid level, because as long as it tastes balanced and contains like some acid, it's probably going to work.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we're about to be at the hour mark. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. I'll just bring this back into frame. This is the second run of this milk punch now.
Oh yeah, looking
And
good.
you can see that's much clearer. I'll probably throw this through like one more time, you know, just for fun. The longer you let the milk sit, like the clearer it's going to be. So it got this clear on 2 runs, just it only sitting for, you know, the amount of time we were talking. So like 10 or 15 minutes maybe. If I'd let that go for an hour, it probably would have like cleared up on the first go round. So, you know, you can manipulate the techniques to the amount of time that you have and the amount of time you're willing to put in and stuff.
Awesome.
But yeah,
Well,
I think
we got all the questions. That milk punch looks great, especially being thrown together very quickly. And like you said, if you mix everything, pour it into your milk and actually let that sit for like an hour or more, it'll clarify even better on the first or second.
Instantly. And you can see too, what's nice is you still like retain some color. So like you can throw some like ruby port in, or like, I don't know, there's all manner of like colorful products you can add. I saw a really cool one that was a clarified New York sour, where like they had the milk punch that was about this color and then like floated the red wine on top of it. I thought that was neat. I'm planning to try that.
That sounds cool. Well, if anybody else has any questions for Josh, is there somewhere they should hit you up? Facebook, Instagram?
Yeah. Get at me on Facebook, just my name, Josh Seaburg. I have Instagram accounts for myself personally at A Hot Dog Is a Sandwich. And for like where I put most of like my cocktail and like more like creative content, which is at Model Citizen Cocktails, separated by underscores. And yeah, if anybody has questions, like really anything vaguely related to this, like cocktail experimental or whatever, like this is the stuff that I spend most of my time thinking about, and I love talking about it, so I'm happy to all the time.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks. It was great talking to you. Great catching up.
Yeah,
Planning
likewise.
for this. You crushed it. I'm excited. I want to make milk punch now. And
I'm gonna have to mail you some of this.
Yeah, please. So thanks again to Campari Academy and Wild Turkey for sponsoring, and with Portland Cocktail Week, Distance Learning. You guys know you can tune in here on Facebook all week at 2 p.m. Eastern and catch more really cool distant learning seminars from different bartender experts from around the country. I highly recommend it. But thank you, Josh. And
yeah, thank you. Thanks
signing off again. I'm Benny Hurwitz. Josh Seaburg. We're out.